Pokemon X and Y holds a very special place in my heart. It was really the time where the Pokemon community on YouTube went into full swing, where I met most of my friends that I'm still friends with today, where I really became a Poketuber for the first time. And it's almost 11 years old now, which is ridiculous to think about. 11 years? I remember sitting down to record the first episode, picking Chespin. Yeah, that's right. I was one of the 7 people that chose Chespin on my first playthrough, not opposed to the 5 that chose Fennekin and everyone else that chose Froakie. But it reminds me almost of a nicer, more simple time where everyone was together. We were doing Wi-Fi battles online. Everyone was excited to get into a new generation, and it seemed quite pure. Of course, that's probably just the nostalgia talking, but today we're going to react to new and forgotten Pokemon X and Y facts, and I was really interested in this because it said featuring Jarvis, and I was like, there's no way there's no way. Oh my god, it is. It's Jarvis Johnson. That's crazy. I absolutely love Did You Know Gaming videos, and we're going to dive into it right now. Because they always have stuff that you don't know. And they always do their own research, and they genuinely find new things by themselves to report.
Did you know? When
No.
Game Freak was deciding what kind of Pokemon to make for Gen 6, they were thinking about the Pokemon World Championships. Talking
Really?
to Nintendo Dream Magazine, they said too many competitors were using the same Pokemon over and over.
And it's a good thing that they fixed that now. Now in the Pokemon competitive scene, there was a wide variety. Everyone's using different teams with different strategies, and they're all doing very well. And then there's Incineroar, and there's Incineroar, there's Incineroar, and Ogerpon too. Hey, people are using a wide variety of Ogerpons. There are 4 different forms on that Pokemon.
The same kind of people kept winning, with series director Junichi Masuda.
The same kind of people kept winning. Okay, to be fair though, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that if you can be consistently on top regularly, that's mostly how most sports work, because the people that are the best at the game are consistently at the top. Take Wolfie Glick, for example. People say that Pokemon is an RNG-based game and it's all luck and there's no skill involved, when there certainly is. The team building and the plays themselves obviously have a lot of skill involved in them, because the people that are usually at the top are always at the top and they're consistently doing well, which if it was all RNG, wouldn't be the case.
Saying, in 2011 and 2012, the junior, senior, and master divisions were all won by Americans. But
And Junichi Masuda thought, no, those darn Gaijin, we need to put a stop to that. I will say, looking at the results of 2010, 2011, and 2012 in terms of Pokemon World Championships, I believe that's the 3 times that Ray Rizzo won Worlds 3 times in a row, which is insane. Becoming the #1 player in the world 3 years in a row is ridiculous.
But this time, lots of different nationalities won, which really gave it a sense of being the Pokemon World Championships. They were also excited to see a wider variety of Pokemon getting used competitively. What they weren't as excited about, though, was getting whooped by their own fans. At a one-time event called the Pokemon Game Show in Tokyo, where people got to play X and Y a few months before launch, developers like Shigeki Morimoto battled against fans, including former world champ Ray
Is that him? That's Ray.
Rizzo.
Yep, that's Ray Rizzo.
And the fans won and the developers lost.
Yeah, listen, I don't care if you made the game yourself. If you're not winning against Ray Rizzo. I battled him once and I got utterly trounced.
He even got beat by elementary school kids.
Okay, guys, come on. You developed the game. Wait, you couldn't put in a little cheat? You couldn't put a little cheat code for yourself? You couldn't put a little Konami code that makes the other Pokemon somehow lose all their attack? No, it would be crazy if you did that.
Morimoto told Nintendo Dream, "It's true, unfortunately. Absolutely, I was nervous, and the battle stressed me out. I really did want to win."
I can imagine developers being really annoyed and really angry that 5-year-olds are beating them in Pokemon battles, and they're just getting so mad. They're like, I freaking made this game. How is this possible? What? We made this!
Speaking of the World Championships, if you dig around in X and Y's internal data, you can find a modernized remix of Gen 1's Champion Battle theme. The track never plays anywhere in Kalos. In fact, the only place you could have heard it legit was at the real-life Pokemon World Championships. Most of you didn't attend, so here's a few seconds of the original, compared to the remix.
Okay. Oh, that's... Damn, Damn, that is so sick. That was in the game? And they didn't... So surely someone's ripped it by now and posted it online somewhere. Come on.
Earlier Pokemon games could take months, even years, to get released around the world. Gold and Silver, for example, launched in Japan in 1999, America in 2000, and Europe in 2001.
I always hate how Europe waited longer. I mean, we're an English-speaking country in the UK, so I can understand why localization for French, German, Spanish, and all those other wacky, daisy, crazy European languages would take a lot more time. But you already have the American version. Surely you can just do a little bit of regulation check-in to make sure that it's all good to release in the UK and just give us that version too. It's not like they localize it to the UK. They have words in the American versions that wouldn't really fly in the UK. Like in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, there's someone that calls someone like a little bugger or something like that, which is, it's a little bit weird. If you're a British person, you kind of know what's going on there.
The Pokemon Company had long sought to streamline the game's translation so that they could sync up a worldwide launch, but it wasn't until X and Y they finally pulled it off.
Coming worldwide, October 12th, 2013.
Which is great for YouTubers because it meant that we did not have to learn Nihongo ga dekimasu.
But why did it matter? According to Masuda, a big reason is the element of surprise. In previous generations, overseas fans would have already seen all the new Pokemon in magazines or online and had story elements spoiled because the games launched in Japan long before they arrived on foreign shores.
And also, why would you want to release your game at a different point anyway? Like, why would you not just want to release it at the same time? It just makes sense to me. I can't imagine like a reason why you'd want to delay it in some areas. You want to play it and they can't play it, and then people are posting spoilers online. Come on, man.
X and Y contain 800,000 Japanese characters, and localizing them into 7 languages was no easy task. But achieving that feat came at a cost. Masuda said that there were originally some more text-heavy features, but to meet the localization deadline, those features ultimately became cut content. Speaking of which...
Wait, like what though? I mean, I would love to know what they are.
When most fans picture the devs, they usually think of the director, Pokemon designers, and maybe programmers.
Oh no, there's like 5 people who work on these games. There's no one else, right? I mean, there's not like 100 people that work on these games,
Folks
surely.
who translate the games to different languages all around the world, the localizers, are usually pretty far down that list. But according to Masuda, if it wasn't for Pokemon's French localizers, Kalos wouldn't have been based in France. X and Y's themes are beauty, bonding, and evolution, with a special emphasis on beauty. Kalos could have easily taken after somewhere else beautiful, like California or Italy, but
Okay, I mean, that's a really funny example to use. Like California or Italy. I get Italy. It's a very beautiful country. It has a lot of historical value for sure. And definitely California is beautiful. It's very sunny. It's got a lot of fantastic vistas. But then every time I think of California, I just think of Los Angeles. And it's not really a beautiful place, to be honest.
We chose beauty because we wanted something beautiful on the 3DS. There were several possible reasons, but I was impressed by how the localizers who translated the previous games into French were very particular about the beauty of the language. So I decided to base Kalos on France.
Oh, they're just so passionate about French, which is interesting. I hear that every time you go to France and you try to speak French, they just kind of scoff at you. They're like, what are you doing? You trying to speak my language? Trying to speak French? You can't salut. You can't bonjour. Je m'appelle. Shut up. How about that?
More specifically, Kalos is based on northern France, as you can see when one map is superimposed over the other. Quite a few real-life locations served as inspiration as well, like Route 10, which is based on the Carnac stones in France's northwest province of Brittany. Local folklore says these 10,000 rocks stand in straight
No, there's 10,000 exactly? Okay, it has to be ghosts. Ghosts or aliens, probably.
lines because they're a Roman legion that the Pope turned into stone. Prism Tower is based...
Right. They all stood in like perfect lines. And some of those rocks are like way bigger than the other ones. Some of them fell over too. They were lazy. They were sleeping on the job.
On the Eiffel Tower. Parfum Palace is the Palace of Versailles, and so on. Some of the Pokemon themselves drew from French culture, in the same way the Unovan Pokemon were inspired by America. In other words, those localizers had...
Like, Froakie was drawn from the French culture of eating frogs' legs, which is why everybody eat Froakie leg.
A massive, massive impact that'll forever continue into future generations. But that we only got the northern half of France, combined with the fact X and Y added fewer new Pokemon than any previous generation,
I think they looked at how many they added in Generation 5 and they were like, this is untenable. We cannot continue the series if we add this many Pokemon every single time. This is a ridiculous amount. This is an utterly silly amount. We should have added this much. I genuinely think that Game Freak kind of regret adding that many and overdoing the amount, the 151. I don't think they should have added more than a 151. Did they really need Patterrz? Let's be honest. Did they really need to add Leavanny into the game? That evolution line, they could have cut that one. I'm just saying.
Less than half as many as Gen 5, for example, led some fans to speculate that Pokemon Z would include new areas comprising South Kalos, populated with new species. So
it will. It just took 12 years to get there.
So naturally, the South Kalos Pokedex leaked online, detailing all the new Pokemon set.
The South Kalos Pokedex with such bangers like Kinrimp, Bakomomon, Shitokage, oh, their Japanese name, and E-Speed
to appear in the Z version. They were fake, of course, but an interesting part of Gen 6 history nonetheless, which...
Why did they think that there was going to be a second half of the Pokedex in like an updated version? That's never really happened before.
Some fans at the time thought might actually be true. Would have been cool if they were, though, honestly. The south of France is famously quite beautiful, and actually a new area like South Kalos wasn't as outlandish as some might think. In fact, it seems the Pokemon Company was strongly considering it, but not in Pokemon Z. Instead, as a DLC. Pokemon Mystery
DLC? They have never done that before.
Dungeon Gates to Infinity released on 3DS in 2012, the year before X and Y. At launch, it had about 30 dungeons.
I mean, obviously, they have now. Like, they have now. I know they have now, but up until that point, they haven't done it. So it would have been, ooh, crazy DLC, especially in the 3DS. 3DS DLC would be weird. I feel like 3DS DLC just doesn't make any sense. I understand why they did it on the Switch. It makes a lot more sense on the Switch, but 3DS that'd be weird and uncomfortable. Make me freaked out a little bit. Make me scared, anxious. I'd probably throw up a little bit.
Then, a little while later, it got substantial DLC in the form of 12 additional dungeons, plus 24 new music tracks. Soon after, before X and Y even released, a Japanese journalist asked Pokemon Company President Ishihara if X and Y were going to get DLC too. Ishihara said, "You mean like the DLC we made for Pokemon Mystery Dungeon? That's the hardest question you could have asked today."
I haven't decided yet. Give me like 5 minutes and I'll think of an answer. Yeah, all right, go on. I suppose we'll do some.
We're considering a lot of things, but I can't give you an answer at this time. If they'd followed through, South Kalos is probably a bit optimistic.
Damn, imagine if that guy asking that question just tilted him in the direction of no. Or he's like, well, I was gonna do it, but like you asked, so I kind of don't want to now, so I think we're just not going to do it now.
12 new dungeons is probably more equivalent to new islands akin to Kanto's Sevi Islands. The Sevi Islands were based on islands off the coast of real-life Kanto in Japan, and France has some real-life islands as well. Or on the more pessimistic end, maybe a new battle frontier. But as we covered in depth in our Z video, Game Freak was busy making other games at the time, like Tembo the Badass Elephant.
Which we all remember, Tembo the Badass Elephant, which is... They really did. Yeah, I respect the fact that Game Freak wanted to spend time making different games because as a YouTuber, on a very much lesser scale, I understand the idea of a creative person being locked into doing the same thing over and over again and feeling if they want to break out of that and do something a little bit different and not be known just for the one thing. Tembo the Badass Elephant doesn't look bad. It doesn't seem that bad. It didn't. I don't know if it sold well. Let's have a look at the Steam charts of Tembo the Badass Elephant. Okay, so we got one player right now. The all-time peak was 77 about 8 years ago, which is not that great. If I'm honest, not that great. But it did have 28,000 viewers on Twitch once. About 9 years ago. So that's cool. That's great.
Ultimately, Gen 6 didn't get any DLC at all, and it wasn't until Gen 8 they started giving us DLC with new areas in Pokemon. Now, to address the meaning of Gen 6, according to Masuda, Pokemon Black and White's theme was polarity. The next games, Black 2 and White 2, had a theme of resonance.
Okay, what does that even mean, though? I'm sorry. Am I too dumb to understand this? I feel like I don't know. Resonance? What is that supposed to mean?
We went through all 12 years of Masuda's blog entries to find X and Y's theme and found it was a bit more complicated, and you might say philosophically deeper than the games that came before. Here's our English translation of a blog he wrote 1 week after Gen 6's release. He said, "The themes are beauty, bonds, and evolution, but there's an even bigger theme, The world is full of wonderful encounters that depend on the circumstances we find ourselves in.
Okay, let's try and extrapolate. What did Masuda mean by that? What did Masuda mean by this? The circumstances that we find ourselves in. Like, for example, if you find yourself in a circumstance where you're locked in an underground layer of a red-headed evil individual that is trying to, for example, maybe destroy an entire country because he's like a little bit sad or something and he thinks that death is beautiful, then maybe you should probably figure that one out. So that's the conclusion I've come to.
If you were born 1 year earlier, you might have made an entirely different group of friends. If your tastes were different, you might have met different people. Suppose, too, that your parents never met.
I never would have existed.
Life depends on the chance encounters they make. Instead of fighting, these encounters should be opportunities to build a better world together.
That's very beautiful, and it's a very nice sentiment. I don't understand what X and Y has to do with that.
The titles X and Y came from this idea. The letters suggest lines on an axis. The lines of both letters head in different directions, but there's a point at which they cross paths. I picked these letters with the idea of intersection in mind. The idea of common points we share with one another, rather than our differences.
Oh, wow. Damn. Oh, I thought they were just sick of doing colors, honestly.
Let's create a better world together. I developed these games to express that idea.
Okay.
Put simply,
Jesus Christ. I wonder if it works.
X and Y are the coordinates of a chance encounter, which could unfold in a huge, significant way, and we should take those as opportunities to make the world a better place.
Wow, that is incredibly specific and deep, and honestly, I kind of like that a lot.
Everyone was expecting Pokémon Z would be Kalos' third version, and there were quite a few clues it was originally part of Game Freak's master plan, as we detailed in previous videos. It's worth pointing out, in geometry, in addition to X and Y, there's also a Z-axis, only in three-dimensional spaces, of course. But Gen 6
of course
was the first 3D generation, so it seems like it would have fit nicely with the generation's theme. That theme of intersection and chance encounters is driven home in X and Y's credit song, but only an acoustic version with subtitles is included in the actual games. No words.
See, it would have made a lot of sense, but then they decided, like, what if we didn't? What if we the sun and the moon, though? I wonder if there's a big explanation on what the purpose behind sun and moon is. Is it to show the frailty of the world that we live in? Is it to show the dichotomy between the heat and warmth of the day and the coldness of the night? I don't know, man. I think Lunala's a cool bat, though.
Words are actually sung. But a version with lyrics does exist in multiple languages, and was first performed in English at the Pokemon Symphonic Evolutions concert in
man, I wish I had gone to one of the Symphonic Evolution concerts. They seem so cool. I think I had the opportunity to go to one of them, but they seem so sick. I don't think they do them anymore, and I'm really sad because I feel like it would be a really beautiful, touching experience, and I'm really not much of a music person. I don't listen to much music, but I will say the Pokemon soundtracks are always bangers. It's always 10 out of 10. It's usually one of the best parts of the Pokemon games, if not the best part. Consistently, the people that make the music for these games are always absolutely killing it. And to go to a Symphonics and see that and feel that in person would be so cool. And I haven't. Maybe there'll be an opportunity in the future. I hope so.
2014, with Masuda himself as the conductor.
He was the conductor? Damn, he's, okay, to be fair, man of many talents. Ooh, okay. Is this copyrighted? We're gonna get struck by this, are we? Damn, her voice is very nice.
In a Japanese interview, Masuda said, "The game also conveys this message, but I thought I could deliver it more directly if I set it to music.
You can tell he's very passionate about what he does here.
It's a miracle that we were able to meet each other during the 100 or so years we get to live."
That is a very idealistic estimate on how long we're going to be able to live. I feel like most people don't make it, but I feel like you'll make it. You'll make it that far. And if you're going to make it that far, you might as well at one point during your 100 years of life experience the wonderful flavors of Gamer Subs using code Patterrz. You can get money off your delicious beverages, either caffeine or caffeine-free, with international shipping and less than $1 per serving. There's really no reason not to.
Out of all 72 Pokemon added in Gen 6, the Phantump family might have the most interesting development. The only non-Japanese Pokemon designer, James Turner, used to work on spin-offs like Pokemon Coliseum and Battle Revolution.
I mean, we love James Turner because he did the Shadow Lugia. Also, I really think that it's cute that when Zigzagoon took damage, it runs through the legs. Oh, I mean, it kind of clips a little bit, but he like runs through the legs of his trainer, and that's really adorable. Also, James Turner doesn't work on the franchise anymore, but he did a lot of work in Galar, it makes sense because he is British.
He later applied to join Game Freak, hoping he could work on mainline entries. As a part of the audition process, they had him design a Pokemon with a time limit of only 30 minutes. Under pressure, James came up with a ghost tree, which years later, after some revisions, turned into Phantump. James still has a lot of affection for Phantump and frequently posts new art and video of it on Twitter. The Pokedex...
That's really cute. And the fact that he managed to do that in such a short period of time, and it was up to the standard. Well, I mean, obviously they made revisions, but it was good enough, considered good enough to where they were like, yeah, let's get this guy to make Pokemon. It must be so hard to be hired to the biggest media franchise in the world to create the creatures that keep it going. Because if they don't have good, cool, interesting Pokemon to sell as marketable plushies, they don't have the biggest media franchise in the world anymore. They don't have the money anymore.
Says Phantump are possessed by the spirits of children who died when they got lost in the forest. Lore-wise, it draws inspiration from Kodama, which are trees haunted by spirits from Japanese folklore. Anyone who tries to cut down a Kodama tree will have a terrible curse cast upon them. Phantump's plenty interesting as a Pokemon design.
Okay, but is it like strong wood? Are they going to make a good table out of it? Because maybe it's worth the curse.
But we really bring it up so we can segue into some developers' deleted tweets with behind-the-scenes info.
Oh god, there's so many dead kids.
The Pokemon Company apparently didn't want made public. In one of those tweets that James Turner deleted, but we archived, he said that he didn't come up with Phantump's lore himself, which was typical of all Kalos Pokemon. Game Freak has a sort of lore specialist who comes up with Pokedex entries and backstories for Pokemon other people drew.
And they have one person for that? I feel like they would have like a whole squad. I feel like they'd have a whole team for that.
Other deleted tweets, he said designers don't get to name the creatures they create, pick their stats, or even their shiny colors. That last one has changed since Gen 6 though. Nowadays,
I feel like the designers should be able to pick the shiny colors of all things, surely. I mean, they can now, obviously, but like it's just interesting that they can't. That A-Drive's gameplay. That's A-Drive's gameplay.
Often do get to design their own shinies. There's one more deleted tweet worth dredging back up. This time from Toshinobu Matsumiya, who was a story writer for over 20 years from Pokemon Yellow all the way to Legends Arceus. After X and Y's launch, he tweeted out the series timeline, saying Generations 1 and 3 take place at the same time, then Gen 2 and 4 happen later.
Damn, they deleted that. They made him delete that. They said, absolutely not. You dare say things about our franchise.
3 years later, to be exact. That's stated explicitly in Gold and Silver. The events in Black and White happen after that. Then finally, Black and White 2 and Pokemon X and Y take place at the very end of the timeline.
It is interesting that Ruby takes place at the same time as Red. I wonder why that's the case. I wonder why this was chosen explicitly.
Or at least the end of the timeline at the time of X and Y's release.
Because they don't interact with each other in any way, so you don't really need to state when they are exactly, especially when the years are so close together and it's based around the same time periods. It's probably like a 5-year difference between all of them at most. So you don't really need to say when they took place, but it's interesting that I guess they didn't choose to. It was more like a developer that went on Twitter and just started saying some stuff.
2 years after the previous games, to be exact, according to Professor Cedric Juniper. Matsumiya later deleted the tweet, as Pokedevs sometimes do when they've revealed too much behind-the-scenes info. Series director Junichi Masuda later threw cold water on fans trying to make sense of Pokemon having a singular timeline at all, saying, it starts to get a little complicated if you pay too much attention to timelines.
Yeah, let me introduce you to The Legend of Zelda. Any of you guys ever seen Link before? Talking about complicated timelines. Why don't we have a look at that one?
Like, there might be a professor that appears, and it wouldn't make sense at all if we applied that kind of timeline logic. So we try not to apply it too rigorously. Whether or not...
So we're saying that Professor Sycamore is actually Doctor Who.
A Pokemon has an official timeline or several timelines. As the guy who wrote the series story over 8 generations, Matsumiya seems he had one clearly defined in his head when he wrote them. Like when someone in Lumio...
Okay, so it's clearly defined in his head, but it's not like an official part of the actual series. He just wrote it in a way where it would work, but doesn't necessarily have to be that way, which makes sense. You don't want to lock something down like that when you don't need to, especially like with Pokemon, you don't need to have a timeline like that. It doesn't really affect too much. Maybe you have some like random NPC dialogue, like maybe this NPC.
City says Trainer Blue came to study abroad in Kalos, which...
I mean, there's also references to that in like Sun and Moon because they literally have red and blue come in Sun and Moon.
Makes sense if X and Y happen a few years after red and blue, but wouldn't make sense a few years before when he was like a toddler. It's worth noting some versions of Grimsley's concept art said Gen 7 occurs 2 years after Gen 6, and thus X and Y aren't at the end of the timeline anymore. But that particular line got erased when the same art was published in the Alola region artworks book.
Oh, it's so interesting that they're paying that close attention to it. Like, scrub that out, scrub that out.
Maybe that was kind of confusing. So here's the timeline summary. Keep in mind, this is based on what the developers and games themselves have said, but...
Okay, so we have Ruby and Sapphire taking place at the same time as Red and Blue. So we have 3 years going on there, all right? I wonder if the Red and Blue... Actually, you know what? I wonder if Ruby and Sapphire's climate issue had any effect on Kanto because they're all in the same country, right? I would assume that since Hoenn is so close to Kanto, you'd hear something about it. Obviously, they didn't plan for that, so it's not going to be in the games. But it makes you think about the wider lore implications. Like, oh, the world almost ended, and there was a massive green Razquaza that came down to dispel the basic owner of the sea and the developer of the land. This is a cataclysmic event. This has to be worldwide news, surely. But it's happening in the middle of a city, too, a populated area. Could you imagine in real life if Godzilla and some kind of sea kaiju came out of nowhere and started just battling in the middle of Venice? That would be a pretty big thing, right?
But the canonicity of some elements are still up for debate. We should also mention that the official Japanese Gen 1 Pokédex book says Red and Green take place in 1996, so you can work out the math yourself on what games take place in which year.
It probably says that it takes place in 1996 because it was released in 1996.
For our last segment, that Pokemon X and Y feature the series' first transgender character. Maybe you've heard that before, but probably not the real story. The character is called Nova, and at the end of her battle, she says, yes, a mere half year ago, I was a black belt. Quite the transformation, wouldn't you say?
And black belts are only male in the Pokemon series, and they even capitalized it so it's usage as a name and not just a classification of where you are in karate. The capital B's mean that it's the name and not just the, oh yeah, I was a black belt.
Black belts are a male-only trainer type, and now Nova's a beauty, who can only be female. According to Legends of Localization, it's even more explicit in the original Japanese version, where Nova says, the power of medical science is awesome, wouldn't you say?
All right, I mean, that's pretty explicit.
Maybe you've heard this before, but have you ever seen Nova in-game with your own eyes? We're willing to bet you haven't, and never seen footage of her either. In fact,
wait, is she not real?
We spent hours looking and couldn't find footage of her in any YouTube playthroughs that cover the part of the game where she supposedly resides.
Was it fake news the whole time?
You might have seen this photo, which is cut off and off system. As far as we can tell, it's the only image online, and it just gets copy-pasted over and over in viral tweets, trivia videos, and fan wikis. In the past, we've debunked similar occurrences where a random Twitter user created a story.
Reminder that Takeshi Shindo, former screenwriter for the Pokemon anime, likes to believe that Brock was so devastated by Professor Isaac because she was lesbian. Likes to believe.
Thin air, then it gets repeated as facts on news sites.
Oh yeah, people will just say things. And then, yeah, what is going on with this? Do you really need an article that badly?
Like how anime writer Takeshi Shudo supposedly said Professor Ivy's a lesbian in his book, even though his book never mentions Professor Ivy. By now, you
doesn't mention Professor Ivy. Okay.
Probably see where this is headed, that Nova, the transgender beauty, never actually existed. But actually, she does exist.
Oh, maybe I guess she could be in the game data, but as an unused battle that you never see.
The point we're really trying to make is she's so thoroughly hidden that 99.9% of players would never encounter her. So hard to find, it seems footage of her has never made its way online until this video. She's in the Battle Maison, and only appears on normal difficulty, which is really like the tutorial, so most fans will only play normal once or never play it at all. Thanks to the Maison's randomized trainer lineup, you've got to beat 15 opponents in a row to even have a chance at seeing Nova, and even then the odds are 90% you still won't see her. It took us hours of playing and
It's so incredibly specific. Why does it work this way?
The Battle Maison to finally encounter Nova, and it turns out she has a bit more dialogue.
Oh, hey, really? Okay, so for the first time, the first trans character has got a bit more to say.
Like, I've recently remade my life completely. I've been reborn as a beauty at last. And
Aw, well, you know what? Good for her.
And if you want to make your dreams a reality, then you have to be completely dedicated.
Aw, that's, you know what? That's very sweet. That's very sweet of her to say.
Besides being deeply hidden in X and Y, we should also mention that in German versions, they changed it so Nova says she used to be a Pokemon breeder, who can be either male or female, and thus removing any indication that she's a trans character. Likewise, in the Korean version,
But only the German one? Why only the German one?
she says she used to be a Taekwondo girl, a trainer class that doesn't even exist. Nova was also removed from Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire's Battle Mason in all languages and replaced with a different beauty named Nohea.
But if she existed in the Japanese version, right? Because the literal translation from the Japanese version was like the power of medical science is crazy, isn't it? So if she exists in the Japanese version, I mean, that's the original one. There's no real ambiguity about that. And she exists in the English version too.
Nohea has similar dialogue, but instead of going from black belt to beauty, she's changed from madame to a beauty. In other words, her big transformation is just trying to look younger.
I mean, damn, she did a great job.
And that's the full story of Pokemon's first transgender character, which, as far as we can tell, before today, hasn't been told in its entirety. Before we wrap up, one quick addendum. Nova was only the first trans character in the Pokemon games. The real first trans character is much lesser known, and actually appeared 12 years earlier in a Japan-only manga called How I Became a Pokemon Card. The manga's 38th chapter stars Akari, who says he used to be a girl, but lived 13 years as a boy and believes he's a boy, despite Akari's mom making him wear girl clothes and use his girl voice, which he hates. Akari's story was the very last chapter of that manga that was ever made. If you want to see what happened...
Oh, well, that's, I'm glad that there was more representation anyway. I 100% will always back more trans representation in video games, and I think it's a good thing overall. All right, that was a really cool video. I thoroughly enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. I highly encourage you to subscribe to Did You Know Gaming. Please, there's so many Pokemon fact videos on this channel that you probably haven't watched, but there's also stuff for other games as well. Pretty much anything that you can think of, anything Nintendo related, and past that as well, like Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Red Facts, and more. So please do go check them out. Please subscribe to Did You Know Gaming. I would really appreciate it. And if you want to see more of my dumb face, you can always subscribe here as well.